Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome into Morning in the Valley. I am Jeff Bidwell. Hope you are safe and dry today. It's here in West Kentucky and really a lot of the footprint of the Missouri Valley today, getting ready to get hammered by a couple rounds of storms today. So, hope everybody will be safe. Coming up in just a few minutes, we're going to have my conversation from yesterday. Got a chance to talk, have an extended conversation with Rocco Miller from bracketeer.org. You see Rocco. Very involved in a newsbreaker in a lot of ways when it comes to non-conference schedules and MTEs. He is involved in that world and help bringing schools together and these multi-team events together, trying to find partners to get in there and play. So he is well versed on the whole process of scheduling. And we talked about scheduling, the challenges that mid-major teams face, uh, and his thoughts on what the Missouri Valley Conference can do. His advice on what Missouri Valley Conference teams can do to help turn the Valley back into a multi-bid league. I thought it was a really good conversation, and hopefully you will think so as well. So that'll be in just a couple of minutes. We'll have that conversation. All right, headlines from today, and there is a I don't know. I feel like this is the word we all thought it was, but now I'm not sure. Epidemic doesn't mean what we all think it means, but I'm going to run with epidemic. There is an epidemic of 7-footers infiltrating the Missouri Valley Conference, and certainly in Peoria, Illinois, there is a boatload of 7-footers. And last night, one final commitment for Brian Wardle and his 2025-26 roster as he gets a commitment from 7-footer Gustavo Guilhermes, who is a from Brazil, originally played his high school basketball at Riviera Prep School in Miami. As we told you last week, after they Bradley signed Jackson Seastrunk as he was another guard from Texas. That he was going to redshirt, sort of a developmental guard, a kid they were very high on, but hey, let's just redshirt him and then we'll get him ready for 26, 27. And the word coming out of Peoria from our friend Dave Aminian from the Peoria Journal Star was, look, we got one more scholarship, and they're trying to find a developmental big. Well, they certainly got a big, and in Gustavo Guimares, he is again the third 7-footer on this roster for Bradley this season. Of course, Ahmet Jonovic at 7'1". He will be a senior, so the plan right now is for Gustavo to redshirt him. He's coming off some knee surgery, which makes it convenient ultimately to redshirt him and use this year to get healthy, to develop his body and so on, and get ready for the college game. So not going to have an opportunity to have 3 7-footers active on the same roster, but he will get a chance once he is healthy to work with Ahmet Jonovic, and then Kai Yu, the 7-foot transfer from Liberty, who will be ready to roll this season for Coach Wardle there at Bradley. So this appears to be, again, the final roster piece for the Braves heading into next season. But size, 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 size. 3 7-footers on one roster. And so we'll see how hopefully this knee injury that Gustavo's dealing with, not a significant one. He can be healthy sooner than later, and then get in the gym and work with these guys to be ready to go and be the best version of himself he can be for that 26-27 season. Scheduling news: the aforementioned Rocco Miller. Again, he is very involved is the best word, very involved in the MTE world and the scheduling world. And he reported yesterday, you'll hear a little bit of it. He breaks a little bit of it during our conversation, but put out the full report later yesterday, that there will now be during feast week, during Thanksgiving, where all of those multi-team events happen. There's always been the one event in Orlando. There is going to be 3 events in Orlando now, 3 ESPN events, and 2 of those will involve Missouri Valley Conference teams. Now, these are not officially official, but when Rocco puts his thumbprint on it, it's official, because as involved as he is, he's not just pulling this out of the sky. He cited multiple sources, but to me, the most important source is Rocco Miller. First and foremost, speaking of the Bradley Braves, they will be part of an 8-team MTE in Orlando. normal 8-game, three games, 18 bracket in that event. It will be reportedly from Rocco, Bradley, Liberty, Princeton, Rhode Island, Temple, Towson, UC San Diego, and Vermont. So out of that bunch, and again, it is so hard to, it's the stock market of the, past results do not indicate future performance. And so, especially now where there's so much turnover every single year, just because somebody was good or bad last year, you don't know what they're going to be this upcoming season. But just looking at what we had last year, look, Liberty, UC San Diego, and Bradley, all top 100 teams in the Ken Palm. I mean, UC San Diego was 39 in the end. Liberty was 64. Both of those were NCAA teams. Bradley won 28 games. Liberty won 28 games. UC San Diego won 30 games last year. But then everybody else, Towson was a regular season champion in the Coastal, won 22 games. Vermont won 21. Princeton 19, Rhode Island 18, Temple 17. So some good pedigrees, teams that may not have been into the dance, but good mid-major programs that won a lot of games last year. And so this appears certainly here on May the 16th to be a good, very good mid-major opportunity to get some top 100 games, hopefully for Bradley. And we will talk about that coming up and the importance and the significance of getting those top 100 games when you're trying to put together an NCAA tournament resume. The other MTE going on in Orlando will host the Illinois State Redbirds. That will be a 4-team MTE in Orlando, and it's just a 2-game event. Again, no dates, no places, no brackets, anything has been released yet. But the 4 teams that Rocco is reporting, along with Illinois State, you have Charlotte, Furman, and Richmond. Of course, Illinois State won 22 games last year. They won the CBI. Everybody coming back, and that'll be an opportunity on one of the ESPN networks to get the Chase Walkers and the Johnny Kinzingers, the 2 all-league guys back, showcase them to America, along with all the other pieces that Ryan Peden has returned to Illinois State next year. These are sort of, again, from last year, sort of 2 halves and 2 teams that struggled mightily. You've got Illinois State, Furman. Furman won 25 games last year, ended up 139 in the Ken Palm. Illinois State again at 132. The other 2 schools, Charlotte and Richmond. Charlotte won 11 games. Richmond won 10. They're both right around 250 in the Ken Palm. So it would feel like the matchup will, it will be set up to prepare you for Illinois State and Furman meeting in the championship game of this yet to be named MTE. But some good opportunities there for Bradley and Illinois State to get some good games Thanksgiving week down in Orlando, and certainly in a much sunnier environment than Peoria and Normal. Some staff news coming out of Nashville as Belmont has promoted graduate assistant Bryce Haas to the director of strategy and analytics. He spent 2 seasons as a grad assistant at Belmont, did his undergrad at UMass, was a scouting and analytics manager at UMass before he came to Nashville to work with Casey Alexander at Belmont. This is significant from a standpoint of that position you see there, the director of strategy and analytics. That is something he is the only staff member currently listed on any staff page of any Missouri Valley Conference school that holds that title. But this wave is coming. There will be more of these as we, maybe even as early as this year. But as the years come, this director of strategy and mostly the analytics part, as programs around the country just boosting up their analytics department, you're going to see more of that. Much like Murray State, the only program right now in the Missouri Valley on the men's side with a general manager. You're going to see those GM positions start popping up in the Missouri Valley Conference as well. Murray State leading the way on the GM side, Belmont leading the way here with this analytics position as well. In the release, Belmont saying that Haas will focus on data analytics, advanced stats, video breakdown, player development, game prep, performance assessment, just digging into numbers and doing what he can with that coaching staff to help get Belmont ready to win as many games as possible. But it's the new day. It's the new day, and these new positions popping up around college basketball. And this is going to be one you're going to see more often than not moving forward. One other piece of news today, as where is my piece of paper? For you, just college basketball fans in the Chicago area. It's not often a Missouri Valley Conference school gets to host a neutral site game, especially when you've got big boys coming in. But that is 100% the case on November the 28th when Oklahoma and Marquette are going to Chicago to play at Credit Union One Arena at UIC. I had a conversation about this the other day. Just sort of from the outside, you're like, well, that's something. That's an interesting matchup there, to an interesting facility as much as anything, to have Marquette and Oklahoma meet. Of course, Porter Mosier used to coach at Loyola. He's from Chicago. Marquette just up the road. They're playing a game at the United Center earlier in the season. I believe it's November the 9th. And so when you sort of look at just the buildings in town, there's not a lot of buildings in town in Chicago. There's a lot of stuff on the outskirts of Chicago, but like downtown Chicago, outside of the United Center, I'm going to go out on a minor limb here. That Marquette and Oklahoma got a much better deal financially in terms of whatever the cost was to get into the Credit Union One Arena, just a bit cheaper than going to the United Center. But that place will be jumping. And for you UIC fans that are around, it's Thanksgiving week and break, and but you got a chance. I'm sure it will be packed. It will be a tough ticket. That's not an overly huge building, but Marquette will bring a bunch of folks. Oklahoma fans in the area excited a chance to see their team play. But it was an interesting rarity to me to see a power game like that coming to a Missouri Valley Conference arena, hosting it as a neutral site game for those two schools. So mark your calendars. College basketball fans in Chicago, November 28th, Marquette taking on Oklahoma. All right, time to bring in Rocco Miller, again from bracketeer.org. We talked yesterday, and a lot of it was just about scheduling and trying to pick his brain on what needs to be done in this current landscape. Can anything be done to sort of push back against the power schools and these bloated conferences, and 14 teams from the SEC getting in, and only 7 conferences getting multi-bids to the NCAA tournament, which is down, from 10 the year before, down to 7. And how the Missouri Valley Conference, a top 10 league, you feel like that's a sense of pride to be a top 10 league, but then to see only 7 leagues got multiple teams in, the gap that still needs to be closed for the Valley. And we talked about that. We talked about the MTE structure that has really gotten challenging for mid-majors here, especially this year, and it's going to continue to be that way moving forward, how the mid-majors can push back. And at the end, we said, try not to have it be all doom and gloom. Try to get some optimism from him about that maybe the sun can shine here on mid-majors, especially at the Missouri Valley level, to be able to get multiple teams in to the NCAA tournament before tournament expansion inevitably comes, whether it's next year or the year after. It'll certainly make it a little bit easier, maybe around the margins, but need to be able to get this league back to a multi-bid league with 68 teams. And we talk about that and so much more. So let's bring in my conversation from yesterday with Rocco Miller.
All right, Rocco, this has been a bit of a pet project, I guess, of mine in the last 2 months, asking the smart people in the room. The Drake Bulldogs, the Drake problem in the Missouri Valley Conference for a team that won, ultimately wins 30 games, but they win the Missouri Valley tournament and they still end up as an 11 seed. In your gut, and I feel like you were one that thought they had done enough if they could get to Sunday. When the dust settled, do you still think they had done enough, or does that 11 number kind of throw up a red flag for you?
Well, it's interesting because, I still think they had done enough. I have the bad feeling in my stomach they would have still been penalized and had to start the tournament in Dayton. But at least they would have had the opportunity. And I think everybody in the Valley could have lived with that because, say Bradley or somebody else wins Arch Madness, they're going straight into the main bracket. You're at least getting one team for the opening round if Drake falls in Dayton. But now seeing how it played out with 14 bids going to the SEC, North Carolina, of course, they had their controversy as well. It's really hard. It's really hard to say. I've actually talked to a number of head coaches in the Valley these last 4 or 5 weeks, and we've had some hot debates about it on the call. Obviously, I'm the one kind of able to look at the data every day and talk to committee members in real time while these developments are ongoing. We only had one bid stolen total in the tournament, but yeah. So I think there's enough reason now for me to even be skeptical, like maybe they would have been the last team out. Now, first of all, like there's no precedent to leave them out. They had they had two really big pieces of gold by beating Vanderbilt by double digits, a team that did get in on a neutral court with a high stakes result by winning a tournament championship game on ESPN. I don't know how you can do something bigger than that for a Valley team, unless you went to like Kentucky on the road or something. And then, of course, backed it up with the Kansas State win and had a phenomenal year from there. So I thought all the precedent for letting an at-large team into the field from a league like the Valley, you always need that win against a tournament-level team away from home. Drake had that. They had 3 quad 3 losses, but I thought the 5 wins in the top 2 quads completely outweighed the bad. So anyway, I would have been a stark defender, but again, I'm getting concerned because we did have 7 non-power voters out of 12, and there is some concern that sometimes they do like to appease the powers that be, even if it hurts their own present job. So there's just a lot of theories about that now, and I don't like that because a team like Drake did definitely belong.
I'm a firm believer in you can't knee jerk over 1 year. Everybody got all antsy, no mid majors in the Sweet 16 this year, but again, wasn't long ago. You had Florida Atlantic and San Diego State in the Final Four. But the last 5 years coming out of COVID to go in terms of multi-bid leagues, to go from 11 to 10 to 9 to 10, but just 7 this year. Is there a worrisome trend in those numbers right now for you, or is it still too early to tell?
Yeah, I think there's both. I think it's fair to say it's too early to tell, but I also think there's a lot to be concerned about because in those 2 short years since we had the Florida Atlantic run and some other great, Cinderella stories, just in the last couple tournaments before this year, the sport has drastically changed in terms of what the players are making. You could take the best player from any of these Valley rosters, not any, but some of the best players in the league, and they're probably making 7 figures next year. That makes it impossible for the Indiana State of 2 years ago to come back and stay for another year, or Josh Schertz himself to stay for another year, or Ben McCollum to stay himself for another year. So these great teams that come together in the Valley right now are 1 year away from all being in the power level and then being an at-large team there. And that's a huge difference because the money wasn't as prevalent and free-flowing even just 2 years ago. It was there. And it was a big deal that those Florida Atlantic kids all stuck together that 1 year. They all did have options to leave, but the money wasn't so big that they had a no-brainer decision to leave. Nowadays, the 11th highest paid Arkansas player would probably be the highest paid player on any Valley team. And that's a lot to digest because that's not just Arkansas. That's probably the majority of the SEC, the Big Ten, and even the Big 12. And those 3 leagues represent upwards of 50 schools. So that's a lot of money going around for upwards of 400 or 500 players. So now, the one thing I love about the Valley and other mid-major leagues is I feel like the staffs and the eye for talent and the eye for continuity and the culture in the communities help build really strong seasons, really strong rosters. And I still think that's why there's hope, and that's why it's too early to tell. But if you're having to go and rebuild that year in and year out from scratch, which is what we're dealing with right now, chances are not very good for really anybody to make a run like that. And that's showing up in the preseason projections. If you look at Torvik going into 2026, I know all of this is kind of take it with a grain of salt because there's some players and pieces missing. But Illinois State being the top team on his board at number 94, Bradley 96, and Northern Iowa, Belmont in the low 100s, and then a big kind of drop from there, goes to show you, how much gap they have to cover just to be interesting in next year's at-large pool.
There is no easy answer. I know this, but someone that is as immersed in the scheduling process as you are, Drake, 29 wins in the regular season, gets to 30 to get to the tournament, and they're living on the edge. If there's any scheduling piece of advice that you can give to teams that are on that level, they think, and sometimes, at large resumes sometimes surprise schools. I mean, you're like, oh, wow, we're better than we thought they were going to be. But for the folks maybe that are like in June and July thinking, I think we've got a good enough team to get in regardless in the 10th best league in the country, what's the one piece of scheduling advice you would give?
Just do everything you possibly can to play the projected best teams elsewhere so you have the chance to prove yourself. That is so much harder to do now than ever before. It's always been hard to do. Right. So, I mean, that's not new. But what's new is the fact that, when I talk to Power 5 teams, all they want to do is play other Power 5 teams. The odds of them playing a team at the top of the valley is slim to none. So sometimes you can only catch them in these events. Now the event space has changed.
Right.
And so sometimes the best thing a team like Illinois State, Bradley, Northern Iowa, Murray State, the talented teams in the league can do is go play like the best teams go get St. Mary's on your schedule. Try to get a Dayton or a team like a St. Louis or a George Washington, who also did incredible work in the portal. Or you can maybe try to get Memphis's attention or try to get whoever the second best American team you think is for next year. South Florida's got a lot of talent with their hire with Brian Hodgson. So that's what I end up helping these teams with. You probably see by the end of the schedule releases that we've got teams from the WCC, the MVC, the Mountain West, the American, and the A10 all playing each other as many times as necessary because, if you're fortunate enough to get a game against the Power 5, it's few and far between. And the really difficult part is, and why the Power 5s are directing their teams to only play each other, is it's really hard to prove in a committee setting that, even if, let's say Bradley goes 11-1, but they never play a Power 5 team, how much are those wins worth? So it can just create more scrutiny to leave a team out. And that's the part that really bothers me a lot about the sport right now, because it's very clear that the powers that be are, at a point with the NCAA where they're threatening to potentially leave due to football reasons. Right. Now the NCAA is appeasing them by giving them extra bids potentially where they might not have earned those bids. And now the schedule plays out in a way to where they can defend those decisions. So this is where we're at. And it's difficult, but I think honestly, like, let's just say doomsday scenario, there's no way for the Valley to get more than one in. I still think it's great to get ready for Arch Madness to go play those types of games anyway. So go schedule like that. And credit to the Missouri Valley office, because starting last year, every team in the league has to play 4 quad 1 and 2 games. It's a mandated part of the schedule. So I'm working with several Valley schools right now to make sure they hit that quota and introducing them to potential opponents. And we're still working on that as we speak.
And again, no easy answer to this, but when you look at the bottom of the Valley last year, and so much of it's such a metric driven business now, and you kind of are what you eat. And when you get the dust settles on the year, and in Ken Palm, you got Evansville's at 254 and Missouri State's 239 and Valpo's at 205 and Indiana State and Southern Illinois right about that 200 level. Is it wise to make those bottom half teams have to go play tough teams, or is it just go play anybody you can to win? Winning has to matter for something, right? In these metrics, and just trying to, so maybe get those teams up to even 175, 150. So when Drake plays them, it just doesn't feel like, or whoever's at the top doesn't feel like this anchor that they can win by 30 and it doesn't help them at all.
Yeah, I tend to think like whether Valparaiso or Evansville has a strong schedule or a weak schedule, the data is the data, right? So if they're out there playing OVC bottom half teams, let's say they're playing Lindenwood and that level of team night in, night out for non-conference, and they're only beating them by 6 or 8, just because they're getting the wins, it'll make their record look good, but the Ken Palms and the Nets catch all that stuff. So they're still going to end up in the bottom 200s or high 300s. So it comes back to how good they actually are.
Yeah.
And that's where I really like what the league office did even for them, because, if it's up to the head coach, which, in all other elements of scheduling, it always is, they're just going to improve their record, because what they want to do is get extended by their AD. They can say, hey, when you hired me, we only won 8 games. Now we won 18 games. Where's my extension? Let's get this thing rolling, even if they only win 6 of those 18 in the Valley. So there's a lot of little tricks to that. And if I was the head coach, I'd do the same thing. So I'm not knocking any of those people in the profession. But what I think ends up happening from a metric standpoint, what the Valley actually needs to help their league not, like you said, eat each other up. You are what you eat. They have to improve the talent and the caliber of players at those bottom rosters. I think that's starting to happen. I think there are positive reinforcements at places like Valpo and Evansville, for example. Missouri State's out of the league now. So I really like that in a way, because the less teams you have, sometimes if you can it's a lot easier to fix your bottom, right? So, and then I think teams like Illinois, Chicago, who, obviously didn't have, they had a disappointing finish. They had some great wins, like in those first 3 months. I saw them play down in Florida, where they had a couple good wins in their MTE. I think, they've invested a lot in that program compared to where they were. And obviously you've got mainstays like Murray State and Belmont who haven't tasted the top of the mountain in this league yet, but those are 2 unbelievable basketball programs, as everybody listening knows. So I like that mix with the other mix of like 5 or 6 schools that are always going to be fighting and competing for championships.
The MTE structure, as you alluded to a little while ago, has changed a lot. Big boys are finding other places to go and going to these NIL type events and so on. When did you first get the sniff that something was changing, that and from the mid-major perspective, these November Thanksgiving weeks, that was usually the only chance you had to go play a big boy, especially to get them on a neutral floor, and those opportunities are drying up now?
Yeah, I think the first sniff was when the $1 million players era first came onto my radar, which might have been towards the end of the 23-24 season, when it was in planning phases. And then I think, Matt Norlander went public with it with a CBS article back at that time, talking about already having somewhere between 6 to 10 teams ready to jump in. And obviously they started last year with 8, but now they're going to have upwards of 20. I think there's 19 right now, so they'll get a 20th. And, when each team gets $1 million just to play in it, there is no competition for that. I mean, there really isn't. So the more teams they can take, it just dilutes everything else. And that's why this year you'll see the weakest Maui field probably that anybody can remember. You still have Texas there, which is one big brand. But outside of that, like, have you ever heard of Washington State or Boise State or even Arizona State getting invited? Right. They're all 3 going to be there. Seton Hall, I love Seton Hall as a program, but out of all the Big East teams, they're the Big East reps. So you can already see a very watered down Maui. You see 2 American teams having to go to battle for Atlantis just to fill that. Mostly mid-majors there. So, up until this NIL Players Era tournament came to light in the last 2 years, the creme de la creme was Maui and Battle for Atlantis. Just loaded fields. Sometimes, 6 out of 8 teams in the top 10, that level of good. Now, you've got the big brands all going there. Plus, there's some leftovers like, Duke's doing their own thing. Kentucky's been doing their own thing. Arkansas does their own thing. Illinois is doing their own thing. So for them to be able to generate more NIL money by doing their own thing, they're not inclined to go to Maui or Battle for Atlantis. So then you get into the next set of events, which are, there's still Charleston, there's still Orlando, and another, beating that happened just from the top of the hierarchy, which is the ESPN events, is the Myrtle Beach Invitational is no longer, it's now folded. The Diamond Head Invitational is no longer, it's now folded for the time being. So you just lost 2 quality mid-major events where the Valley was very prevalent in both of those. Orlando will add a couple brackets that hasn't been announced, but a nice little nugget for the audience. We'll have two Valley teams down there. But after that, then it's just everything else, which is, it's not great exposure. You're not getting on ESPN. You're going to go play some good games, but you're not playing Power 5 teams. And that's leaving all these programs with tough decisions to make. Like, do we just want to go play something on campus, or do we want to go do a destination event and have to pay money? If you go to the Caribbean, you're probably spending 70K instead of making 70K. So it just depends. Like some programs, it makes sense to go do that. Others, it doesn't. Like Murray State's committed to Cayman Islands, for example. So anyway, it just kind of puts everything in limbo, and it's hard to keep anything uniform. And I think that's bad for the fans because unless you're a fan of those 20 schools going to the players era, everybody else it's kind of like a huge mixed bag with not a lot of exposure.
For the players era stuff, and I tried to ask the commissioner, Jeff Jackson, this question last week and landed it poorly. But let's just, for argument's sake, if Bradley is somehow invited to that or somehow gets in,
Right.
like that is a massive, like I just have to imagine it's a Hunger Games thing of you'd almost prefer no Valley teams go to it rather than one, because $1 million into a Valley NIL budget is impossibly impactful as opposed to Duke or Kentucky, where it's like, all right, let's just throw another million, onto the pile.
Right.
So how is there any conversation how that works, or is it are the Valley schools and they're like just so far down the rung that they're not going to be worried about getting invited?
Yeah, I don't think they're at a point where they would be invited. My understanding is that they want to drive the value of this tournament through television, and so that's a branding exercise. Now, obviously, you and I love the Valley, so for us, the brands of the Valley are big in our brains. But to the national audience, it's all about that, which is why you saw San Diego State get invited, even though the rest of the Mountain West would not be invited in that example. And San Diego State, we are very close. We talk a lot, and so they've shared with me once they got that, they were, I think, one of the first teams invited last year. They basically said we can't afford to not do it, even if the money's not real. And they took the plunge early, and that will help them remain a top brand in the sport long term. And they've worked hard for 20 years to be at the top of that league, or basically they're the kings of that league over a long period of time now, and eventually going to be a bullseye in the new Pac-12. But that so that was one where I think they made kind of an exception. The St. Joseph's inclusion is very interesting. I think that's more some behind the scenes connections where they got the invite. So perhaps if there was a Valley program that had some connections like that, maybe they could get the St. Joe's type of love. But besides that, it's all television and branding. They went into this without a TV deal, but they have backing from several sources, including sources that are not just in the United States. We'll just leave it at that. And the idea is to build this into a sport, college basketball as a whole, that would generate global interest. Right now, we love it here in America. In America, March Madness is arguably the greatest sporting event of the year, pro or college. But if you go around the world, they'll know everybody in the NBA, but they don't know anything about college basketball. And they'll know about their local club teams and their local pro leagues, but they will not know anything about college basketball. So there's a large investment right now to see if this will work, because they are, doing more with college football. Obviously, they played in Ireland the last several years. So this is a much, much larger thing than what we're used to dealing with now, because they are looking for the next set of dollars on a global scale with this event.
I think one thing fans may not understand is that you have those ESPN MTEs and teams get a little bit of a stipend to come play in them, but a lot of these other ones, they're pay to play and you've got to go. Do you see as the model as sort of House of Cards falling in on itself a little bit? Is there any momentum towards, look, you just go get sort of your point about, I want to go schedule good teams where you just get somebody to, hey man, we'll host it, and just go get 3 other good upper tier mid majors to come in, and of course they're going to hate playing neutrals or roads, but just from a cost, maybe it's cheaper, and then but you're going to get a round robin of, we can get 3 really good games here in 3 days, rather than having to pay for whatever to go to Cayman or Hawaii or wherever you want to go.
Yeah, that certainly happens in certain parts of the country more often than not. I see that a lot in the Northeast, for example, where you get, and they're not necessarily strong programs, but you'll see, like Pennsylvania, for example, they've done a really good thing by just doing right there at the Palestra. I think it's worked well because Pennsylvania hasn't been that strong the last few years. Now, Fred McCaffrey will be there, so we'll see if that changes. But it's so easy for them to pull teams from in and around Philadelphia to come play. You get 4 teams from 4 different leagues. So and you see that kind of all over the Northeast where teams can just jump on a bus and they'll be there in a heartbeat and play 3 games. Whereas teams in the Midwest, they get kind of sick of the dead of winter there. And I think they're like, I see almost every Valley team pick a tropical place for those reasons. So it's a little bit different thinking. And then in the Southeast, you actually see more of it as well, where, I don't know how great the teams are. Like I know over at UNC Wilmington, for example, they'll go into their 3rd year of hosting and everybody loves that one because it is a little bit of a beach experience, but you're still on their campus and it's not an overwhelming opponent, but it's still really good mid-major basketball. I know Appalachian State, Colgate, and some other, teams that have had consistent success went and played it last year and had a really good experience with it. So it's just got to be kind of the fit there, but the geography is still very important, as I mentioned, as teams are looking for ways to just get the heck out of the cold for a week.
The bye game, felt like 80, 90 was kind of the number for a long time. And now you're seeing 100, 110, 120 thrown out there for some of these guarantee games. And the big boys are just, I feel like Iowa State is always they were the ones that kind of mastered the net a couple years ago. We're just going to go play a bunch of 300 teams and beat them by 50. And suddenly we're 5 in the net. But the inventory of guarantee games to be bought has gotten smaller. How do the mids sort of combat against that? Or, buddy, you just got to go find some more money because that's really the only way you're going to be able to get these games.
Yeah, it's interesting because everybody's budget's different, right? So if you're at a place like Valpo or Evansville, you might notice they're getting bought 3-4 times.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're at a place like Murray, they might only look for 1-2 tops because they have a great fan base. They have revenue coming in from different streams. Their NIL is probably stronger. So it's all a balancing act, right? So place like Oakland, for example, with Greg Campy, every year his number is somewhere around 400,000 that he's got to get. And he's got amazing connections, the longest tenured head coach, I think, in Division I. So you see last year he gets Kansas and Arkansas and one other big one. And he got his 400K basically in 3 games. And so for it all depends on the school and what funds the program, and that's different from place to place. But there are all these different puzzles constantly to solve. I'm involved kind of on all levels because I help all 31 leagues, and by the end of the summer, I talked to probably 250 out of 360. So the vast majority I have a good understanding. But yeah, that's kind of how it breaks down. And then in terms of the amounts, like the reason you see some get bought for 70, some get bought for 120. You even saw like Sacred Heart last year get 140 to play UConn on opening night. There's like varying levels of competition for how bad these teams might be, right? So the very bottom of D1 is worth a lot. It's a bidding war for those games. And Iowa State, in previous years, they've been able to outspend everybody. But if you added up all of Iowa State's guarantee games last year, it came out to over 900,000 in buy money. And so that's a year-to-year decision. Like they might meet at the end of the year and say, you know what, we can play one more hard game. Let's knock that down to 800. Then we can give another 100,000 to a player. So there's just like with all this, basically with the NCAA lawsuits getting settled and this house settlement idea, all this money is going to blend together now, whether it's NIL or buy money or anything that pertains to men's basketball will kind of start being looked at in the same lens. And I think that's going to affect year-to-year decisions. So from one year to the next, we might not see the same strategy from a school. Like Iowa State, I think, is already starting to take on more games next year, that more strategic games, I would call them. But the idea is, you spend the most for the worst teams because if the net expects you to win by 35 and you're good enough to win by 55, you're actually gaining more on the net than playing a team that you're even with and winning by 5, if that all makes sense.
Yeah.
And when you're good at the math and you're good at the analytics, which all these power programs have awesome analytics guys, a lot of them are my friends. You got to do what the math tells you to do. And that's why as a bracketologist and as a lover of mid majors, I'm very frustrated by the net because the whole system is built to to benefit mid majors because they have the athletes and the power to obtain the athletes and the power to perform at a level to where it's just simply inferior for a good chunk of Division One.
My last question for you. I feel like we've doom and gloomed a little bit here, but what's the optimistic side for the mid-major? That 7 multi-bid leagues last year, that number can get pushed closer to 8, 9, and 10 as we move forward.
Yeah, no, I think the optimistic part is the Atlantic 10, some of the American, the WCC, obviously the Valley, the Mountain West will converge into a very strong Pac-12. I don't even know if that will be considered a power conference or not, but they'll have 2 power schools essentially with Gonzaga and San Diego State. I also think with the House settlement and just the Wild West of these last couple of years, there are going to be some reins put in. I also think I have an economics background. I studied economics in college, and I just think there's going to be a lot of these Power 5 programs, especially the ones that miss the tournament, whether it's like a bunch of these ACC teams that don't go, or, I went to Washington, so, we haven't made the tournament in a long time either. So it's just like all these donors who are pouring the money into the NIL and not getting their team to the tournament, they're going to look at this from an economic standpoint and maybe put the reins down a little bit. And I just think there's going to be much more balance at some point. I don't know if that happens this year, but I think long term, the most important thing is two really important things is the places that care are gonna continue to care,
Mhm.
and that means you can bring winning back or build great teams there, much like Murray State has. And the next thing is there's only so many players, and right now globally there are thousands of great players. So if you have the staff to go find those guys, and you find the guys with the right attitudes that like being together, like playing together, so many of these power teams it fall apart at the seams early in the season because the egos are too great, the income's too great. You saw it happen at Miami last year, for example. That team fell apart in less than a month. That's going to happen to a handful of those teams. So the big advantage mid-major has is continuity, playing together, playing for each other, for a greater outcome for everybody. Even if you transfer up later or whatever, you focus on within for those 5 or 6 months and you make the most of it. And you see so many special teams who can do that, like Drake last year, like UC San Diego last year, UC Irvine, etc. There's always going to be a place for that in mid-major basketball.
There was Rocco Miller, and very much appreciate his time and insight on this a very challenging scheduling puzzle. You've heard it for any coach you've ever talked to at this level. This is in a lot of ways their least favorite time of the year of just trying to find non-conference games. But I think the lesson that sort of gets pulled out of that conversation with Rocco is just simply it's all about you've got to get as many good games as you can against the best mid majors. And the problem is, especially now, is that you just don't know from year to year who's got what. You have to, it's always a guess, but now it's more of a guess than ever. And the Missouri Valley, I think the number's 4. You got to play 4 quad 1, quad 2 games, and they sort of help with here are the teams that we believe, with whatever metrics they use over, I think it's over a couple year period that they fit into this number for you to help. But the bottom line is when you look at last year and the West Coast Conference, they were the 7th conference. They were the last multi-bid league that got 2 teams in. Now, those 2 teams were Gonzaga and St. Mary's. Gonzaga ends up 8 in the Ken Palm, St. Mary 25. So I mean, these are very, very good teams. But when you look at what their non-conference schedule structure, Gonzaga played 8 games against top 75 teams in the Ken Palm. St. Mary played 8 teams in the top 100 in the Ken Palm. St. Mary went 5-3 in their games. Gonzaga went 4-4. Because when you look at the WCC, look, the top of their league, they had 5 teams in the top 80. So I mean, it's a very good group of teams there at the top. But they had 4 teams that were 215 or worse. So it was way high or way low. basically. But they played a lot of top 100 teams. And when you go to the Missouri Valley, they had 2 top 100 teams. Drake was 52, Bradley was 92. They had 5 teams that were 190 or worse, as we talked about with Rocco. So a bottom heavy, there's only a little bit at the top. But the key part of it was just simply Drake played 2 top 100 non-conference games. Bradley played 1. The difference between 8 and 1 or 2 is obviously night and day. And that's how you end up getting squeezed. And again, you're doing your best. You're trying to guess. Look, Drake went down there and they're wherever they were. Was it Myrtle Beach? It was Charleston. One of those 2, their MTEs. They play Miami of Florida. You think, hey, that's a great win for us. And Miami of Florida completely just folds and they are not good. So that game doesn't help you. So it's never a perfect science, but there is a heck of a gap between 8 and then 1 or 2. And then you look at the Mountain West. They got 4 teams in. I just looked, I was like, what's the best mid-major that got squeezed out of the tournament? Boise State. They were part of the first 4 out group. They ended up with a 49 KenPom. They were 24-10 at the end of their conference tournament. They played 3 top 75 non-conference games. The 4 teams in the Mountain West that got in, San Diego State, they played 5. Utah State, Colorado State, New Mexico, all played 4. Boise played 3. If they play 4, does that somehow, and especially if they win it, is it enough to get them in? So that's the challenge. That is the challenge. That for Drake to go win 30 games, but when the dust settles on everything, you only have 2 games in the non-conference that are top 100s. It is, even though you go 2-0, you beat Vanderbilt, you beat Kansas State on neutral sites on both of those. That's great, but that's all you got. And then when the league doesn't help you, they ultimately got 5 top 100 games because they got to play Bradley 3 times, and Bradley same way they played Drake 3 times. But you need the non-conference to boost you. And then obviously the other piece of the equation is the bottom of the league. If possible, it's not necessary, but if possible, this is what you see in the SEC. When the bottom of the league and their metric numbers come up, now suddenly, in the SEC, every conference game is a quad 1 game. It just, even if it's fake, you appear strong. The metrics think you're strong. So that is the challenge for these teams. And as Rocco said, everybody, and this was something that Commissioner Jackson said when we talked last week, that scheduling is very personal for coaches. And is it a matter of, our guys sitting there in their office in May and June going, I think we've got a team that's loaded. And I think we've got an at-large team. So let's go challenge ourselves, try to bolster that resume. Do you have coaches that are like, I've got to win so I can keep my job? And so we're going to schedule as weak. I'm not worried about at-larges. I'm just trying to keep my job. So it's always an imperfect science. But the bottom line is it is exceptional. I mean, I think the math, yes, this was a 1-year snapshot, but I think if you go back, you're going to find it a lot. It is very difficult to find a way to to have an at-large resume when you just don't have anything on your non-conference, when you aren't going to have an opportunity to get those quad 1, quad 2 games in conference, to only have 1 or 2 outside of league play. It really, really makes it a challenge. And even when you have a Drake that won essentially all of their games outside of, there was a 4-day window in January and then a home loss in February to Bradley. That was it. Other than that, they ran the table and they were still on that razor's edge. That's the challenge. And that's what the league has to improve upon if they want to get back into that multi-bid conversation. It is a busy weekend on the women's side as it is a busy recruiting weekend. Events all over the country, coaches everywhere are all out. They're in Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, Alabama, Iowa. So I assume this weekend you will see offers flying left and right for 2026 kids and beyond from coaches around the Missouri Valley. So it'll be an active week there. But we will be back with you on Monday. Glad you were with us today. Again, everybody stay safe wherever you are here in our Valley footprint as severe weather rolling through the area really a couple times today. So take care of yourself. If you haven't done so yet, head on over to YouTube. help get us a few more eyeballs and continue to help this show grow and get it in front of as many Valley loving folks that we've got out there, because we know there are a bundle. So thanks again to bracketeer.org's Rocco Miller for being with us today. We will be back on Monday morning, 9 a.m., just like we are every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 9 a.m. Whether you find us on X, Facebook, YouTube, glad you're with us. Have a great weekend, everybody, and thanks for watching Morning